Officer Sarah Martinez walked into the downtown police precinct that Tuesday morning with her chest puffed out and a swagger in her step. She had just received another commendation for her work on a high-profile case, and she wasn't about to let anyone forget it. The bronze medal gleamed on her uniform as she made her way to the break room, where several colleagues were already gathered around the coffee machine. "Morning, everyone," Sarah announced loudly, making sure her voice carried across the room. "Did you all see the newspaper this morning? Front page coverage of the Henderson robbery case. Guess whose picture is right there next to the headline?" Detective Mike Chen looked up from his newspaper and nodded politely. "Congratulations, Sarah. Good work on that case." But Sarah wasn't satisfied with a simple acknowledgement. She pulled out her phone and began scrolling through news articles. "It's not just the local paper. You know, the story's been picked up by 3 different news stations. Channel 7 wants to interview me this afternoon about my investigative techniques." Rookie Officer Jenny Walsh, who had only been on the force for 6 months, listened quietly while organizing her paperwork. She had heard Sarah's boasting many times before, but she still felt intimidated by the senior officer's confidence and apparent success. Sarah continued her self-promotion while pouring herself a cup of coffee. "You know, when I first started working this case, I told Captain Rodriguez that I'd have it solved within 2 weeks. Took me exactly 13 days. Sometimes I amaze even myself with how quickly I can piece together complex criminal puzzles." Lieutenant Barbara Stevens entered the break room just as Sarah was reaching the climax of her story. "What's all the excitement about?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "Oh, just sharing the news about my latest case closure," Sarah replied, her voice dripping with false modesty. "I suppose not everyone can work at my level of efficiency. It takes a special kind of analytical mind to see patterns that others miss." Lieutenant Stevens raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. She had worked with Sarah for 3 years and had grown accustomed to these daily performances. While Sarah was indeed a competent officer, her constant need for validation and praise had begun to wear thin on the entire department. As the morning briefing began, Sarah made sure to position herself prominently in the front row. When Captain Rodriguez began discussing current cases and assignments, Sarah frequently interrupted with examples from her own successful investigations. She compared every new case to ones she had solved, often suggesting that her methods should be adopted department-wide. "The key to effective police work," Sarah declared during one such interruption, "is thinking 3 steps ahead of the criminal. Most officers react to evidence, but I anticipate it. That's what separates good police work from exceptional police work." Captain Rodriguez cleared his throat. "Thank you for that insight, Officer Martinez. Now, if we could return to the matter at hand." But Sarah wasn't finished. "I was just thinking that if more officers approached cases with my methodology, we could probably increase our solve rate by at least 30%. I'd be happy to conduct some training sessions for the department." The captain's expression grew stern. "We'll discuss training opportunities at another time, Officer Martinez. Right now, I need everyone's attention on today's assignments." After the briefing, Sarah made her way to her patrol car, still basking in the glow of her recent success. She had been assigned to patrol the business district, a relatively quiet area during weekday mornings. But Sarah saw this as an opportunity to visit some of the shop owners and business executives who had praised her work on previous cases. Her first stop was the downtown bank where she had recovered stolen funds the previous month. The bank manager, Mr. Thompson, greeted her warmly and thanked her again for her excellent detective work. Sarah spent 20 minutes recounting the case in detail, emphasizing her unique investigative approach and quick thinking. "You know, Mr. Thompson," Sarah said as she prepared to leave, "most officers would have missed the connection between the suspect's withdrawal pattern and the timing of the thefts. But I have this ability to see relationships in data that others overlook. It's probably why I've been so successful in my career. Ivory. Too free. Ivory." Her next stop was the jewelry store where she had caught a shoplifter 2 weeks earlier. The elderly store owner, Mrs. Chen, offered her tea and cookies while Sarah regaled her with stories of her various accomplishments. Sarah made sure to mention her commendations, her solve rate, and the media attention her work had been receiving. "I don't mean to sound immodest," Sarah said, though her tone suggested otherwise, "but I think I might be one of the most effective officers in the entire precinct. My captain is always asking for my advice on difficult cases. Just yesterday, he said he wished he had 5 more officers like me." Mrs. Chen smiled politely and nodded along, though she had heard similar stories from Sarah during previous visits. The elderly woman was kind-hearted and didn't want to hurt the young officer's feelings, but she couldn't help wondering if Sarah realized how her constant bragging affected other people. As Sarah continued her patrol, she received a radio call about a minor traffic accident on 5th Street. When she arrived at the scene, she found 2 drivers standing beside their vehicles, both clearly frustrated but uninjured. What should have been a routine accident report became another opportunity for Sarah to showcase her expertise. "I've handled hundreds of accidents like this," she told the drivers as she began filling out the incident report. "Most officers just write down what happened, but I always look for the underlying causes. Traffic accidents often reveal patterns of driver behavior that can prevent future incidents." She spent 45 minutes on what should have been a 15-minute report, turning the simple fender bender into a comprehensive analysis of intersection design, traffic flow patterns, and driver psychology. Both drivers grew increasingly impatient, but Sarah seemed oblivious to their discomfort. "You know," she told them as she finally handed over the incident numbers, "you're lucky I was assigned to handle this. I have a reputation for writing the most thorough and accurate accident reports in the department. If this case ever goes to court, you'll be grateful for my attention to detail." By lunchtime, Sarah had visited 6 businesses, handled 2 minor incidents, and managed to work her recent commendation into every conversation she had. She decided to treat herself to lunch at Romano's, an upscale Italian restaurant in the heart of the business district. It was the kind of place where city officials and successful business people often dined, exactly the sort of clientele Sarah enjoyed impressing. She chose a table near the center of the restaurant, where her uniform would be clearly visible to other diners. As she studied the menu, she overheard conversations at nearby tables about city politics, business deals, and community events. Sarah found herself eavesdropping, looking for opportunities to join these conversations and share her own accomplishments. When the waitress approached to take her order, Sarah made sure to mention that she was celebrating her latest case closure. "I just received a commendation for solving a major robbery case," she announced loudly enough for neighboring tables to hear. "It's been quite a successful month for me, professionally." The waitress smiled and congratulated her, though Sarah detected a hint of forced politeness in her response. Undeterred, Sarah continued describing her investigative techniques, while the waitress patiently took her order for the chicken parmesan and a side salad. As she waited for her meal, Sarah noticed an elderly man sitting alone at a corner table. He was well dressed in an expensive-looking suit, reading what appeared to be official documents while eating a simple sandwich. Something about his demeanor suggested importance, though Sarah couldn't immediately place why he seemed familiar. Her food arrived quickly, and Sarah began eating while mentally rehearsing the interview she would give to Channel 7 that afternoon. She planned to discuss her unique approach to police work, her impressive solve rate, and her vision for improving law enforcement efficiency throughout the city. Halfway through her meal, Sarah's phone rang. It was Detective Chen calling about a new case that had just come in. A series of break-ins in the warehouse district required immediate attention, and Sarah had been specifically requested to assist with the investigation. "They asked for me specifically?" Sarah said into the phone, her voice carrying across the restaurant. "Well, I'm not surprised. Word gets around when you have a reputation for excellence. I'll be there in 15 minutes. She quickly signaled for the check, eager to get to the new crime scene where she could once again demonstrate her superior investigative skills. As she reached for her wallet, her elbow knocked against her water glass, sending it tumbling toward her lunch plate. The glass struck the edge of her plate with a sharp crack, launching chicken parmesan, marinara sauce, and mixed greens in an arc across the restaurant. Sarah watched in horror as her lunch sailed through the air, seeming to move in slow motion toward the elderly gentleman's corner table. The chicken parmesan landed squarely on his expensive suit jacket, while the marinara sauce splattered across his official documents. Lettuce and croutons scattered across his table and onto the floor around his feet. The entire restaurant fell silent as every patron turned to witness the spectacle. Sarah's face burned with embarrassment as she realized that her moment of clumsiness had just ruined not only her own lunch, but potentially someone else's important business meeting. The confident, accomplished officer who had been boasting all morning suddenly felt very small and foolish. She quickly stood up and rushed toward the man's table, grabbing napkins along the way. "Oh my goodness. I am so sorry," she stammered. "I can't believe I just did that. Please let me help you clean up. I'll pay for your dry cleaning. Replace your documents. Whatever you need." The elderly man looked up at her with calm, measuring eyes. His expression wasn't angry, exactly, but there was something in his gaze that made Sarah feel even more uncomfortable than she already did. It was as if he was seeing right through her uniform, her badges, and her carefully constructed professional image to something deeper underneath. "Accidents happen," he said quietly, his voice carrying an authority that seemed to fill the restaurant despite its low volume. "Don't worry about the suit. These documents can be reprinted." But Sarah could tell that the documents were important, and she felt terrible about ruining them. As she helped dab marinara sauce off his papers, she caught glimpses of official seals and formal letterheads. Whatever this man did for a living, it was clearly significant. "Please," she insisted. "There must be something I can do to make this right. I feel absolutely terrible about this." The man studied her face for a long moment, and Sarah had the strange feeling that he was evaluating her character rather than simply assessing the damage to his belongings. Finally, he smiled slightly and extended his hand. "I don't believe we've been properly introduced," he said, "though I have a feeling we'll be seeing each other again very soon." Sarah stared at the man's outstretched hand, feeling a mixture of embarrassment and confusion. There was something unsettling about his calm demeanor in the face of what had just happened. Most people would have been frustrated or angry about having their lunch ruined and their documents destroyed. But this man seemed almost amused by the situation. "I'm Officer Sarah Martinez," she said, shaking his hand with sauce-stained fingers. "I really cannot apologize enough for this. I'm usually much more careful, but I was rushing to get to an important case." The man's smile widened slightly. "An important case? How fortunate that they have someone of your caliber to handle it." His tone was neutral, but something about the way he said it made Sarah wonder if he had overheard her earlier phone conversation. As other restaurant patrons began to return to their meals and conversations, Sarah continued frantically trying to clean up the mess she had created. The waitress appeared with a mop and additional towels, shooting disapproving looks in Sarah's direction. The elderly man waved away her attempts to help clean his suit and instead focused on carefully separating his soggy documents. "These papers," Sarah said, looking at the official seals and formal formatting. "They look really important. Are you sure I can't replace them or compensate you somehow?" "They can be reprinted," he repeated calmly, "though it may take some time to reschedule the meetings they were prepared for." He carefully placed the damaged documents into a briefcase, seemingly unbothered by the marinara sauce stains. Sarah felt her anxiety increasing. Not only had she made a spectacle of herself in a nice restaurant, but she had potentially disrupted someone's important business. This was exactly the kind of incident that could end up in her personnel file, especially if the man decided to file a complaint with the police department. "Listen," she said, lowering her voice. "I hope you won't feel the need to report this to my superiors. I mean, accidents happen, like you said, and I'm willing to make full restitution for any damages." The man tilted his head thoughtfully. "Report it? Why would I do that? Unless, of course, you think this incident reflects poorly on your professional capabilities?" Sarah felt trapped by his question. If she said yes, she would be admitting that her clumsiness called her competence into question. If she said no, she might sound callous about the damage she had caused. "I just want to handle this situation appropriately," she finally said. How refreshing, the man replied. An officer who wants to handle things appropriately. Tell me, Officer Martinez, what would you say is the most important quality for someone in law enforcement to possess? The question caught Sarah off guard. She had expected him to continue discussing the lunch incident, not engage in a philosophical conversation about policing. But something about his manner suggested that this wasn't a casual inquiry. Well, she said, settling into more comfortable territory, I think the ability to analyze complex situations quickly and accurately is crucial. In my experience, the officers who solve the most cases are the ones who can see patterns and connections that others miss. Interesting, the man said. And how does one develop such analytical skills? Sarah began to relax as the conversation shifted toward her area of expertise. Honestly, I think some people are just naturally gifted at it. I've always been able to see things differently than my colleagues. Just this morning, I was telling my team about my latest case closure. I solved a major robbery in just 13 days by recognizing patterns in the suspect's behavior that other officers had overlooked. 13 days, the man repeated. Quite impressive. And this pattern recognition, it comes naturally to you? It really does, Sarah said, her confidence returning. My captain is always asking for my input on difficult cases. He says he wishes he had more officers with my instincts. Just yesterday, he assigned me to help with a new investigation because of my track record. As she spoke, Sarah noticed that other diners were beginning to look in their direction again. She realized she had been speaking louder than necessary, but the man seemed genuinely interested in hearing about her work. It felt good to have someone appreciate her accomplishments, especially after the embarrassment of the lunch incident. Your colleagues must be grateful to work with someone so capable, the man said. I try to share my expertise whenever possible, Sarah replied. I've even offered to conduct training sessions for the department. There's always room for improvement in police work, and I think my methods could benefit everyone. The man nodded slowly. And what about humility, Officer Martinez? Where would you rank that among the important qualities for law enforcement? The question puzzled Sarah. Humility? Well, I suppose it's important not to let success go to your head. But I think confidence is more crucial. Citizens need to trust that their officers are competent and capable. Of course, the man agreed. But can confidence cross the line into arrogance? And if it does, how might that affect an officer's relationships with colleagues and the community? Sarah felt a slight chill despite the warm restaurant atmosphere. There was something probing about his questions that made her uncomfortable. I think there's a difference between arrogance and simply recognizing one's own abilities, she said carefully. Indeed there is, the man replied. The question is whether others always see that distinction as clearly as we see it ourselves. Before Sarah could respond, her radio crackled to life. Detective Chen was calling to ask about her ETA at the warehouse crime scene. Sarah glanced at her watch and realized she had been in the restaurant much longer than intended. I really need to get going, she told the man. That important case I mentioned earlier. They're waiting for me at the crime scene. 10. Of course, he said, standing up as she prepared to leave. I wouldn't want to delay justice. Sarah gathered her things quickly, still feeling flustered by the entire encounter. As she headed toward the exit, the man called out to her. Officer Martinez, he said, his voice carrying easily across the restaurant. I hope your investigation goes well. I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to discuss it soon. Something about his words sent another chill down Sarah's spine. But she was too eager to escape the embarrassing situation to dwell on it. She waved goodbye and hurried out to her patrol car, where she spent several minutes trying to clean marinara sauce off her uniform before driving to the crime scene. The warehouse district was a maze of industrial buildings and loading docks on the outskirts of downtown. Sarah had investigated several cases in this area over the past year, mostly involving petty theft and vandalism. As she pulled up to the address Detective Chen had given her, she saw 3 other police vehicles already on scene. Detective Chen met her at the entrance to a large storage facility. "Thanks for getting here so quickly," he said. "We've got a weird one. 3 warehouses hit in the past week, but the pattern doesn't make sense yet." Sarah felt her confidence returning as she entered her element. Crime scenes were where she excelled, where her analytical abilities could shine. She had solved dozens of cases by spotting connections that other officers missed, and she was eager to demonstrate her skills once again. "Walk me through what you know so far," she said, pulling out her notebook. Chen led her through the first warehouse, pointing out areas where the intruders had gained entry and describing what had been stolen. As he spoke, Sarah began forming preliminary theories about the perpetrator's methods and motivations. "The thing that's bothering me," Chen said, "is that they're not taking the most valuable items. In the first warehouse, they left behind electronics worth thousands of dollars, and instead took office supplies and cleaning products." Sarah examined the entry points and the pattern of items taken. Something about the crime scene felt familiar, though she couldn't immediately place why. As they moved through the building, she began to notice details that Chen had apparently overlooked. "Look at these footprint patterns," she said, pointing to muddy tracks near the loading dock. "The spacing suggests someone with a limp or leg injury. And see how they avoided the security cameras? They knew exactly where each one was positioned." Chen looked where she was pointing and nodded appreciatively. Sarah felt the familiar rush of satisfaction that came with making important observations. "It's all about knowing what to look for," she said. "Most officers see the obvious evidence, but the real clues are usually in the details everyone else overlooks." They spent the next 2 hours examining all 3 crime scenes. Sarah's confidence grew with each insight she provided. She identified patterns in the timing of the break-ins, similarities in the methods used to defeat security systems, and connections between the seemingly random items that had been stolen. "I think we're dealing with someone who has extensive knowledge of warehouse operations," she concluded. "Possibly a former employee or security guard. The items they're taking suggest they're planning something bigger, using these warehouses to gather supplies for a major operation." End quote. Are Wilden, end quote. Chen was impressed by her analysis. "That makes a lot of sense. How do you want to proceed with the investigation?" Sarah was about to outline her investigative strategy when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Captain Rodriguez's number, which was unusual. He rarely called officers directly, unless there was an emergency or important news. "Excuse me," she told Chen, stepping away to take the call. "This is Officer Martinez." "Sarah?" The captain's voice sounded serious. "I need you to return to the station immediately. There's someone here who wants to speak with you about an incident that occurred at lunch today." Sarah's stomach dropped. The elderly man from the restaurant must have decided to file a complaint after all. Despite his calm demeanor, he had apparently been more upset about the incident than he had let on. "Sir, I can explain everything," she began, but Captain Rodriguez cut her off. "Just get back here as soon as possible," he said. "And Sarah? Bring your incident reports from this morning's patrol. All of them." The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone with growing dread. Why would the captain want her incident reports? What did her morning patrol have to do with the lunch accident? She returned to Detective Chen, trying to keep her expression neutral. "I'm sorry, but I need to head back to the station. The captain wants to see me about something urgent." "Everything okay?" Chen asked, noticing her change in demeanor. "I'm sure it's fine," Sarah said, though she was anything but sure. "Can you handle the rest of the warehouse investigation for now?" As she drove back toward the precinct, Sarah's mind raced through possible explanations for the captain's call. Perhaps the man from the restaurant was more important than she had realized. Maybe he was a city official or prominent businessman whose complaint carried extra weight. Or worse, maybe he had somehow witnessed her boastful behavior before the accident, and was reporting that, along with the incident itself. Sarah tried to remember exactly what she had said during her phone conversation with Detective Chen, wondering if her loud proclamations about the importance of her new case had been overheard and misinterpreted. By the time she reached the police station, Sarah had worked herself into a state of considerable anxiety. She gathered her incident reports from the patrol car and walked toward the building, trying to project confidence, despite her growing nervousness. The desk sergeant looked up as she entered. "The captain's waiting for you in his office," he said. "He's got someone with him." Sarah's heart sank. A formal complaint would definitely go into her personnel file, potentially affecting her chances for promotion. All her success, all her commendations, could be overshadowed by one moment of clumsiness and the man's desire for revenge. She knocked on Captain Rodriguez's office door and heard his voice calling for her to enter. As she stepped inside, she saw the captain sitting behind his desk with a familiar figure seated across from him. It was the elderly man from the restaurant, now wearing a fresh suit and looking entirely at ease in the captain's office. Sarah's mouth went dry as she realized that this was no ordinary complaint meeting. The man's comfortable familiarity with the office and the captain's deferential body language suggested something far more serious than she had imagined. Captain Rodriguez stood up as Sarah entered his office, his expression unreadable. The elderly man remained seated, but turned to face her with that same calm, measuring gaze she remembered from the restaurant. Sarah felt her palms growing sweaty as she tried to understand what was happening. "Officer Martinez," Captain Rodriguez said formally, "I'd like you to meet Commissioner William Hartford, the newly appointed police commissioner for our city." Sarah's knees nearly buckled. The man whose lunch she had ruined, the person she had been casually chatting with about her accomplishments and theories on police work, was the police commissioner. The highest-ranking law enforcement official in the entire city had witnessed her moment of spectacular clumsiness and listened to her boastful monologue about her superior abilities. "Commissioner Hartford," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. I had no idea." "Please, have a seat," Commissioner Hartford said, gesturing to the empty chair beside him. His tone was the same calm, authoritative voice she remembered from the restaurant. But now, she understood the weight behind it. Sarah sat down carefully, trying to process the implications of this revelation. Every word she had spoken at the restaurant suddenly took on new meaning. Her complaints about other officers' limitations, her suggestions for departmental improvements, her casual dismissal of her colleagues' abilities, all of it had been delivered directly to the person responsible for overseeing the entire police force. "I suppose you're wondering why I asked Captain Rodriguez to call you in," Commissioner Hartford continued. "It wasn't about the lunch incident, despite what you might be thinking. Accidents happen, and I've certainly had my share of spilled meals over the years. And I teen quote, undersecond, sent." Sarah felt a small wave of relief, but it was quickly replaced by renewed anxiety. If this wasn't about the restaurant incident, then what was it about? "I'm here," the commissioner said, "because I've been conducting informal evaluations of officers throughout the department. As the new commissioner, I believe it's important to understand the culture and attitudes within our organization." Today's encounter was quite illuminating. Captain Rodriguez cleared his throat. "Officer Martinez, Commissioner Hartford has shared some concerns about your interaction at the restaurant. Specifically, your comments about departmental procedures and your colleagues' capabilities." Sarah's heart sank as she realized that her boasting had been even more inappropriate than she had thought. She had essentially criticized the entire department to its top administrator, presenting herself as superior to officers and procedures that the commissioner was responsible for overseeing. "I think there may have been some misunderstandings," she said weakly. "I was just trying to make conversation after that embarrassing accident." Commissioner Hartford leaned forward slightly. "Officer Martinez, let me ask you the same question I posed at the restaurant. What do you believe is the most important quality for someone in law enforcement to possess?" Sarah felt trapped. She had already answered this question once, and clearly her response had been problematic. But she couldn't think of a way to change her answer without seeming dishonest. I think there are many important qualities," she said carefully. "Integrity, dedication, the ability to analyze situations effectively, and humility?" the commissioner asked. "You seemed less certain about that quality when we discussed it earlier." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah realized that this was a pivotal moment in her career. How she handled the next few minutes could determine her future with the department. "I'm beginning to understand that humility might be more important than I previously thought," she said quietly. Commissioner Hartford nodded. "Tell me about your recent commendation. The Henderson robbery case that was featured in the newspaper this morning." Sarah felt a mix of pride and apprehension. The case had been her greatest professional success, but she was now afraid that any discussion of her accomplishments would sound like more boasting. "It was a complex investigation," she said modestly. "I was fortunate to be part of a team that worked hard to solve it." "That's interesting," the commissioner said, "because according to the case file, you worked almost entirely alone on that investigation. Detective Chen provided minimal support, and you specifically requested to handle most aspects of the case yourself." Sarah realized she was caught in a contradiction. Her attempt at false modesty had backfired, making her sound dishonest rather than humble. "You're right," she admitted. "I did handle most of the investigation myself. I suppose I was trying to sound more collaborative than I actually was." "Why?" Commissioner Hartford asked. The simple question forced Sarah to confront something she had been avoiding. "Because I'm starting to realize that my attitude might not be as professional as I thought it was." Captain Rodriguez spoke up for the first time since the introductions. "Sarah, Commissioner Hartford and I have been reviewing your performance records. Your solve rate is impressive, and your technical skills are excellent. But there have been some concerns raised about your interactions with colleagues and your approach to teamwork." Sarah felt her carefully constructed professional image crumbling around her. "What kind of concerns?" Several officers have mentioned that you tend to dominate conversations about cases," Captain Rodriguez continued. "You often interrupt briefings to share examples from your own experience, and you've made comments suggesting that other officers' methods are inferior to yours." "I never meant to," Sarah began, but Commissioner Hartford held up a hand. "Officer Martinez, let me tell you what I observed during our conversation at the restaurant. You spoke about your colleagues as if they were less capable than you. You suggested that your methods should be adopted department-wide. You claimed that your captain regularly seeks your advice and wishes he had more officers like you. Is that an accurate summary?" Sarah wanted to deny it, but she knew he was right. "Yes, sir. That's what I said. And do you believe those statements were appropriate for a patrol officer to make to a stranger in a public restaurant?" The question was devastating in its simplicity. Sarah realized that even if the man had been an ordinary citizen rather than the police commissioner, her behavior would have been inappropriate. She had been so focused on impressing people with her accomplishments that she had lost sight of basic professionalism. "No, sir," she said. "It wasn't appropriate." Commissioner Hartford leaned back in his chair. "I've been in law enforcement for 35 years, Officer Martinez. I've seen officers with exceptional skills destroy their careers through arrogance and poor judgment. I've also seen average officers become exceptional leaders through humility and teamwork. Which path do you think leads to greater success?" Sarah thought about her colleagues at the precinct, many of whom had years of experience and had solved numerous difficult cases without feeling the need to constantly announce their accomplishments. She thought about Detective Chen, who had praised her insights at the warehouse crime scene without any hint of jealousy or resentment. She realized that her behavior had probably made her colleagues uncomfortable and created an atmosphere of competition rather than collaboration. "I think humility and teamwork lead to greater success," she said, "both for individual officers and for the department as a whole." "Good," Commissioner Hartford said. "Now, let me ask you about your current investigation. Detective Chen called me an hour ago to discuss the warehouse break-ins. He was quite complimentary about your analytical work at the crime scenes." Sarah felt a surge of pride, but immediately suppressed it. "Detective Chen is very experienced. I was lucky to learn from his approach to the investigation." "Actually," the commissioner said, "Detective Chen told me that you identified several crucial pieces of evidence that he had missed. He said, your insights significantly advanced the investigation." Sarah wasn't sure how to respond. She didn't want to downplay her contributions, but she also didn't want to sound boastful again. "I'm glad I could help," she said simply. Commissioner Hartford smiled for the first time since she had entered the office. "That's the right response, Officer Martinez. Confident, but not arrogant. Proud of your work, but respectful of your colleagues." Captain Rodriguez pulled out a folder from his desk. "Sarah, we've been discussing your career trajectory. Your skills and solve rate suggest that you have the potential for advancement, possibly into detective work or specialized units. But leadership requires more than technical ability." Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. Despite her mistakes, it sounded like her career wasn't over. "What would I need to do differently?" she asked. Commissioner Hartford answered, "Start by listening more than you speak in briefings. Instead of interrupting with examples from your own cases, ask questions about how you can support ongoing investigations. When you solve a case, focus on thanking the people who helped you rather than highlighting your own contributions. And work on building genuine relationships with your colleagues," Captain Rodriguez added. "Several officers have mentioned that they feel uncomfortable approaching you for advice or collaboration because they worry about being judged or criticized." Sarah realized how isolated she had become without even noticing. Her focus on individual achievement had prevented her from developing the kinds of professional relationships that were essential for career advancement. "I understand," she said. "How can I repair the damage I've already done?" "Start with small gestures," Commissioner Hartford suggested. "Thank Detective Chen for his guidance on today's investigation. Ask rookie officers if they need help with their cases. And offer support without making them feel incompetent. Share credit generously when cases are solved." Captain Rodriguez nodded. "We're going to try something different with the warehouse investigation. I want you to continue working with Detective Chen, but I'm also assigning Officer Walsh to assist. She's new, but she has good instincts. I want you to mentor her and help her develop her investigative skills." Sarah thought about Jenny Walsh, the quiet rookie who often listened to her boasting in the break room. She realized she had never actually spoken directly to Jenny about police work, despite having numerous opportunities to offer guidance and support. "I'd like that," Sarah said. "I think I could learn a lot from working with both Detective Chen and Officer Walsh." Commissioner Hartford stood up, signaling that the meeting was ending. "Officer Martinez, I want to see you in my office again in 3 months. Captain Rodriguez will provide regular updates on your progress, and I'll be interested to hear how you've applied today's lessons." Sarah stood as well, feeling both relieved and determined. "Thank you for this opportunity, Commissioner. I won't let you down." As she reached the door, Commissioner Hartford called her name one more time. "Officer Martinez, remember that the best police officers are those who make everyone around them better. Your technical skills are impressive, but your leadership potential will be measured by how well you help others succeed." Sarah walked out of the captain's office with a completely different perspective on her career and her relationships with colleagues. The lunch incident had been embarrassing, but it had led to a conversation that might have saved her from making much more serious mistakes down the road. She found Detective Chen at his desk, reviewing evidence from the warehouse crime scenes. For the first time in months, Sarah approached a colleague with the intention of listening rather than impressing. "Detective Chen," she said, "I wanted to thank you for your patience with me today. I learned a lot from watching your approach to the investigation." Chen looked up, surprised by her tone. "You did excellent work at those crime scenes, Sarah. Your observations really moved the case forward." "I appreciate that," Sarah said. "Captain Rodriguez mentioned that Officer Walsh will be joining us on this case. I'm looking forward to working with her and learning from both of you." Drun. As she walked toward her desk to write up her reports from the day, Sarah caught sight of Officer Walsh organizing files near the copy machine. For the first time since Walsh had joined the department, Sarah approached her with genuine interest in having a conversation. "Jenny," she said, "I hear you're going to be working with Detective Chen and me on the warehouse investigation. Do you have a few minutes to discuss the case? I'd love to get your perspective on what we've found so far." Officer Walsh looked surprised but pleased. "I'd like that very much," she said. "I've been hoping for a chance to work on a more complex investigation." As they sat down to discuss the case, Sarah found herself asking questions and listening to Walsh's insights rather than dominating the conversation with her own theories. She discovered that the young officer had noticed several interesting details in the initial reports that neither she nor Detective Chen had considered. For the first time in her career, Sarah understood that success in law enforcement wasn't about proving she was better than everyone else. It was about becoming part of a team that could accomplish more together than any individual could achieve alone. The lesson had come from an embarrassing accident and a conversation with a stranger, but it had the potential to transform not just her career, but her entire approach to life and work. The boastful officer who had walked into Romano's restaurant that afternoon was gone, replaced by someone who was finally ready to become the kind of police officer and leader that her community deserved.